was a small village, and like small villages, a few houses. And in one of the houses, there lived a man. That man lived with his wife and his older grandmother. Now, one day, as he was sitting in his chair in front of the fire, he sat and he listened, and he could hear grandmother in her rocking chair. And that rocking chair sat in it, went squeak, 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 squeak. And it bothered him. But it got worse, because his wife got into the kitchen and she was banging and clanging pots and pans. Finally he stood up and he looked around his home and he said, "This house is too noisy for me. I can't stand it." And he stomped out the door. Well, he, as he was walking away from his house, bumped into his next door neighbor. Now his next door neighbor was one of those kind of people who always had an answer for everything. And the husband looked at the next door neighbor and he said, "You know, my house is so noisy. My mother-in-law squeaks in her rocking chair, Grandma, every day, all day long. And my wife is always in the kitchen, banging and clacking and cooking something up." And the neighbor smiled and he said, "I've got just the answer for you. You go out to the back of your house, out to the chicken coop, and bring in 2 chickens. Well, the man looked at his neighbor and said, "2 chickens? You want me to bring 2 chickens into the house?" "You bring 2 chickens into the house." And so he went out to the chicken coop. He chased the chickens around and finally put one under each arm and brought them into the house going, "Buck, buck, 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 buck," and he set them down. Well, he sat back in his chair in front of the fire, and now not only was grandmother squeaking in the rocking chair and his wife was in the kitchen banging and clattering around, but there were chickens flying up and down, up into the rafter and back down into the rafter with feathers everywhere and clucking and feathers flapping and wings in his face. And he went, this house is too noisy." And he walked out the door. Once again, he bumped into his neighbor, and his neighbor had an answer. "I'm sorry, that didn't work. It was probably not the right answer. This time, go out to the barn, and out in the barn, go and bring in your cow." "You want me to bring a cow into my house? My house is not very big. My house is not a barn. You bring the cow in." So he brought the cow, pulling it into the house, put it in the middle of the living room, squeezed around the cow, sat down in his chair, and thought, okay, this for a minute seemed a little bit better. But soon the chickens up in the rafters were cackling, and his wife was banging, and Grandma was squeaking, and the cow was bellowing, going, "Moo!" And the man looked at it and said, "This is getting worse, not better." And he walked out, and he looked at his neighbor, and he said, "You had me bring a cow. You had me bring chickens. It's just getting worse." And his friend said, "I'm so sorry. I was totally wrong. What you need to do is you need to go and you need to find your cat and dog and bring them in as well." A cat and a dog. So he ran around, chased the cat, brought it in, got the dog, brought the dog in. So the cat was sitting on his lap in front of the fire. The dog was sleeping right by the bottom of his chair, when all of a sudden Grandma's rocking chair started to squeak, and the cow started to moo, the chicken started cackling, the dog stood up and bit the cat's tail, the cat screeched, his wife banged, and he stomped out of the house. And he said, "I'm done with your suggestions. This is not working." And his friend one more time said, "I've got the answer. Go home, shoo the cat and the dog back out, put the cow in the barn where it belongs, the chickens in the chicken coop." And with that, that's just what the man did. He sat down in his chair and he settled in, and he could hear grandmother quietly going, "Squeak, squeak, squeak." And he could hear the soft rustling of the pans on the stove as his wife cooked up the evening meal. And he folded his arms and he said, "This house is just perfect."